So hello, everybody. This is another episode here with Sex Talks with Diana, and we're here today with Rachel Music. She is a writer. She is also the founder of Schadenfrau Studio, and she is as well a former sex worker. So we're going to be talking a little bit about sex work and a little bit also about what she's doing in the studio. So thank you so much for being here, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, Diana. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. If you were to give advice to a person who is thinking on becoming a sex worker,
Okay.
what's your advice for them? Because when you want to become a teacher, a doctor, whatever, you can look it up. You have a lot of information around, but what about sex work?
If you don't go into a room or a date or an escort situation or a sugar daddy interview, any of these things, if you don't pick up the phone or turn on a live stream without your boundaries intact, and without having a confident sense of what your hard limits are and the understanding of a transactional atmosphere, then you will very likely find yourself either violating those boundaries or compromising those boundaries, or you will put yourself in a position where you're more emotionally vulnerable than perhaps you need to be. So if I can unpack that a little bit, because I realize I talked in a giant circle to get to kind of
course.
A pretty simple point. And I'm sorry, that's just the nature of how my brain works. I have to go around my elbow to get to my ass.
That's fine.
So I was a 20-year-old person and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was thrust into this dungeon scenario where you are told something pretty simple. And on paper, it makes sense to you. I go in the room, the person tells me how he wants me to behave, and then I behave accordingly. That seems pretty simple. But you're dealing with individuals who are looking, gosh, this is going to turn into a novel. Suffice it to say, because there are like so many side stories that I could take this to, and I don't know if that's necessarily always where you want, because there's a lot of ground to cover. All I'm saying is I would be a much better dominatrix now at 30 than I was at 20, because when you're 20, at least when you were me, it is very tempting, and it is very tempting in my experience with young women who may find themselves drawn towards sex work, that they are very attention seeking. And I do not mean that in a you're crying for attention. I mean, there is a desire to make people's lives better. Most of the sex workers that I've met, they tend to be empathetic individuals. They are mediators. They are caretakers. There is something about them that allows them to be generous with their bodies and their time and their intimacy. This is not something that is just trivial and can be thrown away. There's a lot of emotional labor that goes into being somebody's fantasy for an hour. And it's so easy on the outside to dismiss it as, here's an attractive person who makes money hand over fist for something that anyone could do. And I just want to challenge that perception, because when it is your job and you're doing it, like I was sometimes 25, 30 hours a week, you are equal parts a personal assistant that needs to look at their penis, and
of course,
and also a therapist who needs to accept the really truest and rawest versions of themselves. And I had clients who were their best selves with me, and I had clients who decide that they can be their worst self with you. And I think that the nature of money changing hands affects everybody differently. Now, I've also worked with people who completely had boundaries intact, and they were able to walk in on the job, whip somebody with a single tail, walk out, change clothes and go get rooftop margaritas. And that's incredible. And if you have that sensibility and you have that confidence, then go stack that cheddar, because you'll do well in this business. But if, as I have found, you're somebody who craves human connection, and that maybe leads you into a line of work where you can use that. It is an asset, but it is an asset that can be turned against you, or you can burn out a lot. I've seen a lot of young women get burnt out from being emotionally open and being intimate with people. And if you don't take the time to self-care and recharge, whether that is knowing you have to take 3 days off. You only can work XYZ amount of times. You need vacations. If you can't go into something treating it like a job that needs to be recovered from, then the shelf life you'll run into some. You're going to have a bad time. So that would be that is the very long version of the advice that I would give anyone getting into the business. It's weirdly the same advice I would give somebody if they were going to get married, or if they were going to move to a different country. It is the exact same kind of thing, is that know yourself, know what you want to get out of it, know what you will not accept, and remain steadfast in that. And once it's there, you just job in. Are there also dicks in the room? Like, just.
Yeah. Someone who's thinking of getting into sex work, they are putting themselves at certain risks that, you're not usually going to put yourself at any other job, especially because of the stigma, and especially because of the legal situation of sex work around the world. So, yeah, I don't know, like, what would you tell these people about that?
I would tell them to do as I say and not as I did. At the time, I was 22 years old and divorced. So sex work didn't help my marriage. It didn't. Now, granted, my marriage was flawed before getting into sex work, but I would say that it certainly eroded more trust in the relationship, and my own dissatisfaction started coming through because I was suddenly making more money and meeting more people. And there's also an intoxicating idea that every time you walk into your office, people find you attractive. So it's very easy to suddenly take somebody for granted because you go, ha, I'm hot shit. Everyone at work thinks I'm very beautiful and they give me money. And it's very easy to suddenly undervalue your partner. And I did that in a very short-sighted 22-year-old way. But to actually I'll say don't do what I did, because there are plenty of ways that you can mitigate the risks and not be where I was, which is I accepted a job after only meeting a client one time, and I accepted a long distance out call and did not vet this client with other providers. I did not seek any references from them. And you can do everything right. You can tell somebody where you're going to be. You can set up a safe word. You can think you'll know how a scene is going to go, and you can still get raped and need your rapist to drive you to the train station and then pay you because he had agreed to pay you for your time. And then this is an unusual situation. This isn't something. It's not similar to like a date rape or an assault where somebody jumps out of the bushes at you. Inherently, there is so much. I remember riding this train, this 3-hour train ride back to New York City where I was, and pulling the stigma out of the air. Suddenly everything that I had said about, no, I'm an independent person who is, just exercising my right as a consenting adult, and this is the way that I make my money, to all of a sudden you soak in, no, what happened to me was because I'm a sex worker and I fucked up at some point, if I can say that, and I messed up at some point, and that is why this has happened. Or you even have the thought of, well, I guess I'm a full service sex worker now, but I didn't make that decision. And that's a really tricky thing to navigate, because at the end of the day, you still take the money. It was just all being said. And suffice it to say, I did not report. What happened. I just really fell apart for a few weeks, and luckily, after a long time, was able to pull myself out of it. But I would say, do not do what I do. And there are ways to mitigate and make sure things like that do not happen. There are sites that exist. FOSTA SESTA has made it very, very difficult for these things to exist. And I hope that could be a transition for us to talk about FOSTA SESTA, because there should be safeguards in place that protect human beings. And everyone can agree with that sentiment. But as soon as you say there should be ways to keep sex workers from falling prey to rapists by being able to give references to one another, and that falls under, no, that site should not exist, because it potentially has an ancillary connection to a website that has had a tiny amount of posts connected to child trafficking, which is also something that nobody likes. But that is the sneaky, insidious part of FOSTA SESTA, because once you put something under the banner of, well, y'all hate pedophiles, don't you? Because everyone hates pedophiles. Nobody wants children to be trafficked for sex. This is a horrible thing. But you can sneak so much underneath that bill. And that is what happened. And it prevents, business women and businessmen and business people. It prevents individuals who are just trying to make a living and survive from being as safe as they possibly can. The only reason that what happened to me is because the dungeon no longer made money. And I needed to outsource. Like, it was safe in the dungeon because we had a security guy. We had, we had their driver's license. So if anything happens, we go, we're going to call the police. And you don't have that when you are meeting strangers from Twitter or fielding calls off of Backpage. And I'm not saying that Backpage was a wonderful thing. It's clearly not, but it served a purpose. And the problem is everything that got swept up into that witch hunt.
Usually when we talk about FOSTA SESTA, we talk about, how it affects everybody right now, and the pages, the posts, the things that just are not allowed anymore and that just get taken down and everything. But I think is like what keeps happening right now, like how, for example, farmers and people who have always worked a certain way, right now they have to rethink the whole thing. And then I don't know if you know of any stories, because as you've mentioned, you had these sort of jobs. You could easily just say, you know what, I'm getting out. But probably a lot of other people did not have that possibility.
They didn't. And that's why I understand that I was really blessed to have that other job at that time. And frankly, after having gone through the first attack and pulled myself up by my bootstraps enough, you know what? Take that. I'm not even going to use that expression because it's been co-opted by a bunch of assholes. So I have managed to be resilient and claw my way back into a better mindset. And when I hit that hurdle, FOSTA SESTA, it was just insurmountable. I went, you know what? I overcame something really terrible and traumatizing. This is a totally different level, and it was just annoying. And it sounds very petty to go, it was worse than a rape. And I'm not saying that administrative annoyance is worse than a rape. In no way am I saying that. But after having overcome that, I went, no, I do not think that this is worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I had to take my leave of it. But I did know people who really suffered because that was their only source of income. And like I said, people got hurt or people went without. It just breaks my heart. It's similar, in a way, it's very similar to all the creative people that I knew, or all the gig-based people I knew, or the freelancers I knew during COVID. And I mean, I'm sure you have your own reference. Just suddenly imagine that and I think that might be a way to spin it, is I think that everybody knows, oh, Jackie has whatever Jackie did, and now Jackie can't do it because of COVID. But if half of your friends are sex workers, I went through that of, wait a minute, we were basically grounded and cut off from not being able to go in the office, essentially. That's funny because I actually hadn't thought of the parallel until just now. But yeah, so it was the last real straw for me, because I couldn't go through something else that was, I needed to move forward, because there was just a place where the hustle and sex work as a grind, and what I had come to understand it as, and the boundaries and the way that I had built up myself into it again, was no longer serving me. And I moved on because I wanted to write about sex work, and I wanted to bring cultural awareness to sex work. And I felt that I could do a lot better. And I would be a lot happier doing that. So that's why I pivoted.
I would like to close with one question, which would be, for anybody listening, probably they wouldn't be listening to this, but if they do not agree with sex work by any means, or if they are unsure, maybe they're trying to change their perception, what would you tell them? And I guess this question goes directed to what needs to change in individually in each of us for the world of sex work to be different, and for people who are sex workers to be safer and to thrive in their profession.
I would say that the number one paradigm shift would be to put sex and intimacy back into the hierarchy of needs, with food and shelter and education. If you're traveling on a dark night and you find a motel that's open, you are so welcome. They have so given your life something that you need, and you want to pay them for that room for the night. If you are lonely, or you are anxious, or you have blue balls, and you find somebody who has lifted that burden for you, or you are a widow and you just would like to, break off some steam with a hot piece of man meat, you want to thank that person, and there just shouldn't there. I don't see. I would ask an individual who is against sex work, who hurt you? It's a bit of a meme, but who hurt you? And why do you not want to reward putting more happiness in the world? And I wish it didn't sound that hokey, but it almost is that simple. Is if you can change sex from something that you're ashamed of to something that you're proud of, something that you need, like you need food and water, well, then suddenly you think that, Sasha Grey is as amazing as Gordon Ramsay, because they both make things that you enjoy. Gordon Ramsay, famed restaurateur. Sasha Grey takes it in the keister like a champ. They're both amazing people.
I love it. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me and for, with us today. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And thank you for being just this lovely, funny person that puts everything into simple words. So just for, tying it up a little bit for the listeners, just thank you for being here. And remember that, sex education and empowerment are vehicles for peace. The more we know ourselves, the more we understand ourselves sexually, the more we can be at peace with ourselves, understand others, and just create a better world. And hopefully that will happen one day.
I'm with you, Diana. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you.